Hello everybody, hope you're having a great day during these crazy times. If you're not having a good time at the moment, man, just remember things will get better. This crazy coronavirus situation will blow over eventually, but I'm hoping that over the next hour, as we talk about these fights, I can at least take your mind off things for a little bit. And we will be taking a very deep dive into all the main card fights taking place this weekend at UFC Fight Night, Kattar versus Holloway, where we go through each of the matchups, take a look at them from a betting perspective, and I'm really hoping that you can use the information in this video to make better betting decisions this weekend. And as ever, boys, if you scratch my back, I will scratch yours. If this video gets 300 likes, I will do a live stream this Friday where we will take a look at all the fights taking place this weekend to try and dig up a decent value prop bet for every fight. So hit the like button below, and also while you're there, may as well hit subscribe if you haven't already. 300 likes, boys, I will get that video out for you. And the prop bets have been doing pretty well. They're profitable over the last 2 years, so don't forget, hit that like button, we'll get that live stream going. Also want to remind you guys that if you do want to watch breakdown videos for the rest of the fights that I won't cover in this video, because if I do cover all the fights, you know it's going to be like 2-3 hours long, we'll keep it short. But if you do want to go balls deep on this card, if you want to get my perspective on the other fights taking place on the prelims, head on over to my website, MMABettingTips.com, where I post a 10-minute breakdown video of all the prelim fights as well. You'll also find a live stream archive which contains a massive library of videos where I document and record myself researching all the fights, so you can kind of learn how to research them for yourself. And if you'd want to join me on these live streams, I do live stream all my research on Twitch for free. So head on over to twitch.tv/Diary of a Pro Gambler. I'll leave a link in the description below, and you can get a notification when I go live to join me on Twitch and research these fights with me. But if you can't, be there live to watch all the streams live, head over to my website. They're all posted on there. But with that being said, boys, let's get into some breakdowns. So the first fight that I want to talk about in this video is going to be David Zawada against Ramazan Emeev. So there are going to be certain recurring themes throughout this video where I'm not really going to be able to form too strong of opinion on some of these matchups because, certain either gaps in information or pieces of information add quite a lot of uncertainty to the most likely ways that these fights are going to play out. So when you take a look at a guy like David Zawada, it's very difficult to get a read on where he's currently at in his career because he's only 30 years old. He's still very young, still just hitting his prime in MMA, so he's going to be making big improvements from fight to fight. On top of that, he hasn't been that active. If we go back to November 2018 when we last had a good look at him, when he was last involved in a fight that went a decent amount of time against Jingliang. That fight was 2 years ago now, and since then he's only spent around 3 minutes in the octagon. So with a guy like David Zawada probably earning decent money now in the UFC, he's got experience of 3 UFC fights under his belt now. He could have improved a hell of a lot in the last 2 years, especially with him only being 30 years old. But because we haven't really seen him over the last 2 years, it's difficult to know what version of Zawada we're going to get. So when I talk about this fight, I can give you, the most likely outcomes based on, Zawada's past fights. But the problem is the version of we get of Zawada on Saturday night could look a hell of a lot better than what we've seen from him in the past, just because he's been quite inactive. So there are certain things about Zawada's overall skill set that do make this a very difficult fight for him. So when you take a look at the odds, we can see that Ramazan Emeev, he is one of the biggest favourites on the entire card, right? He's currently round about a 1.36 favourite, which is minus 278 for an implied probability of 74%. We take a look at Zawada, he's currently in the 3.2 odds range, which is plus 220 for an implied probability of 31%. So Emeev's one of the biggest favourites on the card, and it's one of those situations where when you research the fight, I can definitely see why Emeev is a big favourite, but at the same time, there's enough danger there for me with what Zawada brings to the table where I don't think it's necessarily smart to bet Emeev as a big favourite, largely because with Zawada being so inactive over the last 2 years, we don't really know what version of him we're going to get on Saturday night. But we could talk about what Zawada has shown us so far. So he took his first 2 fights in the UFC on short notice, which was obviously really unfortunate because he lost a close split decision against Danny Roberts and was knocked out in the 3rd round against Jingliang. Now, he lost both those fights for pretty much the same reason. Zawada came out the gate very aggressive in round 1, did very well. He won the first round against both Jingliang and Danny Roberts, but because he came out in the first round so aggressive and exerted so much energy, he ended up kind of burning himself out and then progressively slowing down as the fight went on, and obviously eventually lost the fight very late on against Jingliang and gave away a split decision against Danny Roberts. Now, for me, this is the main aspect of why this fight's so difficult to predict from a betting perspective, because, you know, based on Zawada's past fights in the UFC, you'd say, you know, this guy's got a bad gas tank. You know, Emeev has got an excellent gas tank. I don't think we've ever even seen this guy breathe heavy. Emeev can push a very high pace for 15 minutes. But perhaps Zawada, you know, gassed out in those fights because, you know, he was taking them on short notice, so he didn't have a good training camp. Maybe he was just inexperienced, so, you know, he wasn't used to pacing himself over 15 minutes. You know, maybe because he was very early in his UFC career, kind of adrenaline dumped a little bit under the, you know, fighting under the bright lights of the UFC. Something he's probably been dreaming of his whole career, right? So on one hand, we can look at Zawada and we can say, you know what, his gas tank cost him the fight against Danny Roberts. Jingliang is probably going to get him into trouble this weekend against Emeev as well. But it's inconclusive because there are reasons why he may have gassed in those fights, and we haven't seen him in 2 years, which means he might have cleaned his cardio up a lot. So that's the main aspect of this fight to think about, because Emeev can push a high pace for 15 minutes. Zawada will struggle to keep up with that pace. So how do these boys match up from a technical perspective? Well, Emeev is one of these combat sambo guys that at times uses his wrestling a lot, at times prefers the kind of stand and strike. If the fight does stay standing, I do give Zawada a pretty good chance of being very competitive here. Zawada is one of these guys that just appears to have abnormal power for his division. And when he lands on guys clean and hard, you can really see it gets their attention. Almost like it catches them off guard that they can't believe that a guy like that hits that hard. You know, guys that I would compare him to, you know, guys like Dan Henderson, Nico Price, they just have this abnormal power. And I would put Zawada into that box. When he lands on guys, it gets their attention. Now, Ramazan Emeev is one of these, you know, tough as nails, durable combat sambo guys. He's only been KO'd 1 time in his 23 career fights. So, you know, on paper, it's unlikely Zawada hurts him standing, but you never know. Zawada can definitely crack. What I would say is Emeev, unfortunately, has a really bad case of T-Rex arms. You know, he's a little bit undersized for the welterweight division. He's only 5'10" with a 68.5-inch reach. Zawada is 6 foot tall with a 75-inch reach, so he's going to have a massive, almost 7-inch reach advantage, and he should be, you know, a bit more physically imposing than Emeev as well, which could neutralize, you know, the skill gap a little bit. My one knock on Emeev when it comes to striking is that he's a little bit passive. He doesn't really throw the highest volume of strikes, but even though, you know, when it comes to striking, Zawada could probably do quite well here. The one major chink in Zawada's armour that we have seen is his takedown defence and ground game. Now, like I say, this is inconclusive. He could have improved his takedown defence and ground game a hell of a lot over the last 2 years. But every time I've seen someone shoot a nice deep takedown entry on Zawada, he's gone down very easily. Now, I know at this point you're probably thinking, how the hell can you say this guy's bad on the ground? He just submitted, you know, a Nurmagomedov. Surely he can't be that bad. For me, this was a little bit of a strange submission. If you go back and watch that fight, it just looks to me like Nurmagomedov got a little bit complacent on the ground with Zawada, got caught in a bad position, and was forced to tap. But I don't really rate Zawada's ground game from what I've seen. He also looks pretty weak off his back. He's not great at working his way back up to his feet, but he's tough as nails, game as hell, and super scrappy. So this is a tricky fight. I definitely understand the odds because, you know, with Zawada only really having a decent gas tank for 1 round, you know, with Emeev being, you know, one of these guys that's got, you know, very strong combat sambo based grappling to fall back on if he does get into trouble standing, and with Zawada's takedown offense and ground game being so bad, it's one of those fights where I definitely see, you know, why Emeev is a big favourite, but personally, he's way too big of a favourite for me to even consider betting on, because at odds of 1.36 minus 278, there's a lot of risk there because Zawada hits hard. Emeev's a little bit passive standing, which means, you know, Zawada could outwork him if Emeev comes in with a very striking, heavy game plan and doesn't choose to grapple much, which we've seen him do it in the past. We've seen him not use his grappling in the past. So yeah, it is a bit too much risk for me. And of course, the biggest risk factor is we haven't seen Zawada in the last 2 years. You know, only 3 minutes in that Nurmagomedov fight, so he might show up and look way better than he ever has done before. So that is that fight out the way. It is going to be a pass for me, but don't go anywhere because we do have a bet in this video, so chill out. We will get to some bets. But that fight in particular is not one that's too interesting to me from a betting perspective because we don't really know what we're going to get from Zawada. Now, earlier on in the video, I did say that there would be some recurring themes in this video. And one of the recurring themes you're going to hear in this video is me say quite a bit for some of the fighters on this card is that we don't really know what we're getting from them. And that rings true for Punahale Soriano and Dusko Todorovic. Just because, even though they've had a good number of fights, they've had 17 fights between them, Todorovic 10-0, Soriano's 7-0, someone's always got to go. When you look at the record of both these guys, you can see that the vast majority of their fights have ended in round 1. We can see that 6 of Soriano's 7 career fights have ended in round 1. And we can see that, you know, a big percentage of Todorovic's fights have ended inside the distance as well. Soriano has only gone to a decision 1 time, and so has Todorovic. He's only gone to a decision 1 time. And the problem with this is, even though they've both got, you know, a good number of fights between them, they don't really have a lot of in-competition experience. They don't have a lot of experience of, you know, reacting to being put in bad positions and having to come back and fight through that. They don't have a lot of experience of pacing themselves over 15 minutes. And that has shown a little bit in Soriano's past fights, not so much in Todorovic's, but when you see guys like Todorovic and Soriano that, you know, haven't got a lot of in-cage experience going 15 minutes and pacing themselves over that 15 minutes, quite often it takes them a while of going to decisions to kind of work out their pacing and output across 15 minutes. And until they develop that, it's always kind of risky to know how they're going to show up and perform. So to give you a more tangible example of what I'm talking about, if we look at Soriano as a really good example, 6 of his 7 career fights have ended in round 1. So Soriano's very used to going out there, starting very aggressively, throwing everything that he's got at his opponents, and he's just very used to them rolling over and dying. You know, you can see how many first round knockout wins this guy's got, and when he does have you know, submission wins, is quite often because he's come out aggressive and hurt him with strikes beforehand, and then they've kind of turtled up and he's managed to get some kind of submission. He's not used to guys kind of weathering that early storm and taking the fight into the later stage of, you know, the second and third round. And because of that, what you find from Soriano is he's absolutely devastating in round 1, but in the second and third round he becomes significantly less effective. And we see that in his fight against Jamie Pickett. He came out super aggressive in round 1, tried to kill Pickett. You know, he was literally wasn't throwing any range finding strikes, wasn't throwing any volume strikes at all. Soriano was just coming forward in straight lines, winging big wide power hooks, looking to basically kill Jamie Pickett. And when Pickett weathered that early storm in round 1, Soriano was way less effective in the second and third round. If you go back and watch that fight, you can see that Soriano's output fell off a cliff in round 2, and on top of that, you know, he became a lot less dangerous because his arms were heavier, more tired. He didn't carry as much power in his hands. His output and work rate dropped. And that's a big concern for me because I don't see that so much in Todorovic. We've got, you know, only one real fight for both guys to assess on, you know, how they're going to look if the fight goes the distance. Todorovic has only been to 1 decision. Soriano's only been to 1 decision. But what I would say is Todorovic was far more effective in the second and third round at doing what he does best than Soriano. I feel like Soriano is one of these guys that has a real kill or be killed style where he throws everything at his opponent in round 1, and then if he doesn't get them out of there in round one. He just kind of hopes things will work themselves out in the second and third round. That'll work against these lower level guys, but as soon as you start to go up a level, that can get you into trouble. So Soriano is the underdog in this fight. His odds have started to decline a little bit, but he's currently at odds of around an average of 2.30, which is plus 130 for an implied probability of 43%. If we take a look at the odds on Todorovic, he is currently around about a 1.65 favourite, which is minus 154 for an implied probability of 61%. This is one of those fights for me where Soriano is a very, very, very tempting bet. Just because, from a technical point of view, he's got the skills that really cause Todorovic some problems. I think from a technical point of view, Todorovic is going to struggle, especially early in this matchup when Soriano has got the gas in the tank to perform to the best of his ability. From a technical point of view, I think Soriano is better than Todorovic everywhere. Todorovic is one of these guys that's kind of reasonably good everywhere but great at nothing, whereas Soriano's a former NCAA Division 3 level wrestler, and while his boxing isn't the most technical, he does hit like an absolute truck. And he is very, very dangerous because he throws everything into his shots with very bad intentions. So Soriano is very tempting here for me because he's very dangerous early. He's got the advantage when it comes to striking and grappling. It's just I hate to bet on fighters who throw everything into the first round and then fade very hard in the second and third. If I'm betting on a guy, I like to feel confident that they've got the skills and the output to outwork their opponent over 3 rounds. I don't want a fighter that's going to put all his eggs in one basket in round 1. And that's why this is very tricky for me. Soriano's tempting, but his all or nothing approach to that first round really bothers me. I mean, it's been working out for him, but one thing that does concern me a bit about Soriano is that he came out the gate super aggressive against Pickett in round 1, blew his load, and looked really flat in the second and third. But then you could let him off the hook and kind of say, you know what, it's the first time he's gone to a decision. Maybe he will have learned from that. And maybe, you know, in his UFC debut against Oscar Pichota, he'll start a little bit slower, pace himself better, and spread his output over the 15 minutes a little better. That didn't happen. He literally came out in round 1, again, trying to kill Pichota. And again, you know, had he not got Pichota out of there in round 1, I'm assuming he would have looked very flat in round 2 and 3 again. So maybe Soriano's just one of these guys that's going to need his gas tank to cost him a win for him to kind of change and realise that his style's unsustainable as he faces a higher level of opponent. Maybe he's going to have to take a loss to learn from his mistakes. But that Pichota performance says to me that he hasn't quite learned from his mistake yet. So obviously I can't use UFC footage to kind of illustrate points I'm trying to make, because obviously it's copyrighted. But there are a couple of small clips I can show you which kind of give you a little clue as to why I think Todorovic could be in some trouble standing in this fight. So it is worth noting that the fight that I'm going to show you here between Todorovic and Michel Pereira is from back in December 2018. So Todorovic has improved a hell of a lot since this fight. And also, the fight that I'm going to show you from Punahele Soriano is from James Horn, which was, you know, it's over 2 years ago now. Both these guys have improved a hell of a lot since the footage that I'm going to show you here. I would say Soriano's improved a hell of a lot more. Soriano's kind of stiff and flat with his striking. You know, in this clip I'm going to show you, he moves a lot better now. Todorovic hasn't changed too much, if I'm honest with you, but I just want to show you a couple clips here. So this is literally the very beginning of round 1. Soriano's in the grey shorts, and I just want to show you how aggressive he is when he comes out. Super aggressive, comes forward, walks his opponent down, just winging these wide hooks. Now I will say he's very bad defensively, doesn't move his head much, comes forward in straight lines with his chin up high and exposed. However, he does hit extremely hard, and he's very, 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 very aggressive. Here, he looks very sloppy, like I say, flat-footed, you know, not too technical, just kind of winging these big wide hooks and hope he lands something. He moves a hell of a lot better now. He's still very wild, he's still very reckless, but he does set up his power shots much better than, he did, back in 2018 in this fight. He sets his shots up way better now. He moves much better. He's improved a lot. But that kind of shows you what style to expect from him. Comes out in round 1, winging big hooks, looking to take his opponent out. Now, the reason why I think that style can cause Todorovic a little bit of a problem is because Todorovic is one of these guys that fights with his hands very low, chin up high and exposed, and quite often struggles to read his opponents. What you see from Todorovic is when guys blitz forward and attack him, he tends to move back in a straight line with his chin up high and exposed, kind of like trying to lean back out of a range where he can be hit. The problem with that is he doesn't keep his hands up to block shots. So when his opponent does blitz forward, he does tend to eat quite a lot of big shots. You kind of see him do it there. Pereira didn't land, but as Pereira comes forward there, you kind of see Todorovic read that he's going to attack, and he kind of just moves back in a straight line, moving his head back to try and slip the shot. Now, that's okay against a guy like Michel Pereira, who's primarily a single shot striker or a striker with a kick-based style of striking, because as Todorovic moves back, someone like Pereira is going to throw that one big right hand, you're going to slip it, or if it lands, it's only going to be a glancing blow, and then you can go right back to controlling the center of the octagon, putting some pressure on your opponent. The problem when you use that style of striking defense against a guy like Soriano is you kind of see it there again. Todorovic gets caught cold. The problem when you try and do that against Soriano, when Soriano comes forward, he's not coming with, one single strike. He's coming with 4, 5, or 6. And if you get caught, flat-footed against the cage like a rabbit caught in the headlights, getting overwhelmed by that pressure, he's going to stand right in front of you and tee off. And with how Todorovic instinctively fights with his hands low and just tries to use leaning back and head movement, you kind of see it there again. Very reckless. See how kind of like stiff and tall he stands. Very stiff and tall. So the problem with that stiff and tall stance is when you got a guy like Soriano who's going to come forward winging these big power hooks, Todorovic can either get caught cold, or if he tries to lean back and move back to escape, basically the blitz and attack from Soriano, and he misjudges it, he can get KO'd quite bad. So I hope that kind of shows you a little bit of the reasons why I think Soriano is... You kind of see it there, right? You kind of see it there. He just... In this moment, right? In this moment here, kind of show you here, right? Kind of show you here. It's not. I understand it's not the best clip. You need to go back and watch their most recent fights to see what I'm talking about. But here, Todorovic reacts to the right hand, right? Todorovic is stood right in front of Pereira. Pereira throws his right hand, and he keeps his hands down. Keeps his hands down. His chin is always up high and exposed, but he manages to just slip that shot. But as he goes back, Pereira doesn't really follow up with much. Pereira throws one single shot there. Todorovic reads it and steps off to the side. But there is a moment in this sequence where Todorovic is kind of trapped against the cage. Now, you go back and watch Soriano's last fight against Pichota, and you can see that's going to be a real problem, because Soriano's not just going to throw 1 or 2 and then allow Todorovic to circle away from him and take control of the center of the octagon again. He's going to be following up with 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 strikes. And that is a big problem for a guy like Todorovic, who just doesn't keep his hands up and at times doesn't read his opponent very well. So I am going to pass on that one. Soriano's a very, very tempting bet for me as underdog odds. For those of you that like dog hunting, I would say you might want to take a look at Soriano. This is definitely a dog or pass fight. I just hate betting on guys that go out there, commit everything in round 1, try and kill their opponent in round 1 and maybe fade as a result of it. So now let's get into the next fight. We are going to be talking about Joaquin Buckley against Alessio De Chirico. Now, before I started researching this card, if you would have asked me who the safest bet on this card is, I would have told you it would have been Joaquin Buckley, right? He was the first name that jumped out at me as a potential bet. Now, we can see here he is one of the biggest favourites on the card, although his odds do appear to be improving. No, they're not really improving. They flatlined. But Buckley Currently one of the biggest favourites on the card. He's around odds of about 1.38, which is minus 263 for an implied probability of 72%. Prior to researching this fight, I would have said that this guy, like I say, would have been the safest bet on the card. But after watching footage of these guys, I feel completely different now. I really do feel completely different. It's a tricky one, man. It's a very tricky one. I love Joaquin Buckley. You know, I hate doing breakdowns like this sometimes because, you know, fighters are amazing athletes and they entertain us. They put their lives on the line. They put their bodies on the line every week. They're braver than I will ever be to do what they do, right? But one negative aspect of my job is that I do have to be critical of guys who are capable of doing things that I will never be capable of, right? So, I'm even getting a little bit uncomfortable talking about this. So, Joaquin Buckley is an amazing fighter. He's a talented, young, hungry bull at 26 years old. He's getting better from fight to fight, and he's blessed us with some amazing performances and some amazing, you know, highlight reel knockouts for us to enjoy. He's incredible. Having said that, I'm going to say something really harsh here. I do think he's a little bit of a one-trick pony. And in many ways, he's very, very similar to Ponzinibbio Soriano in that he comes out the gate very, very hard in round one, looking to use his power and athleticism to get his opponent out of there, just to take him out, to punch a hole in their head. And then if he doesn't get him out of there in round one, he becomes significantly less effective in the second and third round. His output drops, his arms get heavier, doesn't carry as much power in his hands. You know, the big one for me with Buckley is into the second and third round, he just doesn't throw as much because he puts so much into round one. And I was trying to find a clip of him saying this himself. I couldn't quite find the clip because, you know, when I'm researching fights, I watch lots of different MMA content, and sometimes I struggle to remember where I've seen certain fighters say certain things. But I think Buckley said in an embedded video leading into his last matchup against Jordan Wright that he's very, very grateful for the push that the UFC have given him. I think that, you know, Dana's Instagram post, or the UFC's Instagram post showing Buckley's knockout of Kazanghani, I think it was like the most viewed social media post from the UFC in history. So the UFC has shone the spotlight on this guy, and rightly so. It was an incredible knockout. But in the embedded video, Buckley said that it's not just enough for him to win anymore. He wants to go out there and entertain people, get big knockouts, and, you know, get the bonus checks. And that has led to a lot of pressure because, you know, it's hard enough going into the UFC, you know, at the highest level of mixed martial arts and winning. When you actually then try and take it one step further and try to choose how you win, that becomes very difficult, especially when you're relatively inexperienced. You know, Buckley is still only 26 years old. He's got a lot of lessons to learn. And, you know, if you go back and watch his last fight against Jordan Wright, you could see that he was fighting like he had a plane to catch. Very similar to Ponzinibbio Soriano. Came out in round one, came forward, winging big wide hooks, looking to take Jordan Wright out. And it worked out well for him. It really did. He got a great, you know, second round knockout, caused Wright big problems in round one, and, you know, kept that momentum going. You know, everyone's hyped on Buckley right now. I know many of you watching this video will be like, you know, this guy doesn't know what he's talking about. You know, Buckley's going to smoke the Chirico. I understand many of you will be feeling like that. Leave a comment, you know, below and let me know. But what I would say is there is some danger here for Buckley because he only really has one attack. If you go back and watch Buckley's fights, even though he's a striker, he's very, very ineffective in kickboxing range, which means when two guys are stood in front of each other in the middle of the octagon, he doesn't really know what to do. He can't land like a jab or a hook or a kick in kickboxing range. Buckley can only land when he's blitzing forward. So what you see from Buckley is he will blitz forward and attack his opponent. He will come forward in a straight line. He will wing big wide hooks with his chin up high and exposed. And he won't pay any attention to his striking defense or what his opponent is going to do. He will just come forward in a straight line, winging hooks. He will light them up, he will land some big shots, and then when they've weathered the storm, when he realizes, okay, I'm not going to be able to knock this guy out in this blitz, and I'm getting a little bit tired here, Buckley will then retreat to the center of the octagon and hope that that blitzing attack has put his opponent in a big enough defensive shell where they'll kind of give him, 20, 30 seconds to catch his breath, get his heart rate down, and chill a little bit in the center of the octagon before his next blitzing attack. That is basically all Buckley does. If you go back and watch his past fights, is why I said Buckley is a little bit one-dimensional. It's the same strategy over and over. Blitz, retreat. Blitz, retreat. Blitz, retreat. That's all he does, and that's all he brings to his game. The problem with that style is, number one, it becomes very easy to game plan for, and number two, you become very predictable because every time you come forward, your opponent knows exactly what to expect. And number three, because he throws so much into getting his opponents out of there in round one, I don't want to repeat myself again, but he falls into the same trap of everything we've just said about Soriano. If he doesn't get his opponent out there in round one, he becomes significantly less effective in rounds 2 and 3. And it's like that famous quote from Chael Sonnen: when you try and win a fight by knockout, you often end up losing a decision. And that is the big problem with guys like Buckley and Soriano that put so much emphasis on getting their opponents out of there in round 1. Because if they fail the mission, they will almost always struggle in the second and third round. And one real big concern for me with Buckley is that his defense is very, very bad. When he is coming forward on those blitzing attacks, he pays no attention to what's coming back the other way in terms of counters from his opponent. He's very, very, very reckless. And this is a concern for me because even though he's a big, strong, athletic guy, we know that he's not bulletproof. He was knocked down twice and knocked out by Kevin Holland. We know that his chin isn't bulletproof, man, and he's very, 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 very reckless. So when you look at a guy like Alessio De Chirico, you're probably saying, Chris, why do you even care that Buckley's reckless? De Chirico isn't a finisher. He's had 8 fights in the UFC, and he's only ever finished one dude, Oluwale Bangbose, and that was because Bangbose gassed himself out. Why are we even concerned about the possibility of De Chirico, punishing Buckley for his recklessness? This guy's got no power in his hands. He's a decision machine. And to some degree, I can see where you're coming from. But when it comes to, what I do for a living, betting on MMA, a lot of the time we've got to read between the lines and really dig into the performances and what happened in each performance to try and paint an overall picture of the reality of a situation. Yes, it is true that De Chirico has not looked terribly dangerous in his UFC career, right? But when you read between the lines, he did wobble Zach Cummins in the first round of this fight. And we know that Zach Cummins has got a really, really good chin. He also dropped Muradov in round 1. And we know how good Muradov is. Muradov is very tough. He also went the distance with Kevin Holland, who is no joke. In this fight against Julian Marquez, this was in the period of De Chirico's career where, he really had very bad cardio. And so he slowed down after one and just didn't really have, enough snap in his shots, enough power in his hands to really bother Marquez, into that, second and third rounds. We've kind of seen 2 different versions of De Chirico. There's the De Chirico, I would even throw Holland into there actually. This version of De Chirico was quite flat and average and basic. But De Chirico does appear to be getting better and better and better and making big improvements from fight to fight. So while he hasn't looked particularly dangerous in his past fights, reading between the lines with him wobbling Cummins, knocking Muradov down, I wouldn't completely disregard this guy's ability to cause Buckley problems. Because De Chirico, when guys blitz forward and attack him, he likes to plant his feet and fire back with a counter right hand. Now, if you look at De Chirico, you can say, okay, the guy is a decisionator, he's not particularly dangerous. But you can also say he's tough as nails because, again, he's had 8 fights in the UFC. He's fought some tough guys, Bangbose's no picnic, Holland, Muradov, Cummins, and only one guy has managed to finish him. And that was all the way back in 2017 when he only would have been, 28 years old. Looking at that, you could say, De Chirico's pretty tough. It's not going to be easy for Buckley to get him out of there. And so with how hard the Chirico commits to his counter right hand and how reckless Buckley is coming forward, there are ways that the Chirico can win this fight. And on top of that, since the Chirico has cleaned up his gas tank issues, his cardio now looks pretty good. If Buckley does throw everything into round one and the Chirico weathers that early storm, there's a very, very good chance that the Chirico can outpoint, Buckley into that second and third round and win a decision. So this is another fight for me where, I understand why Buckley is a big favourite, because it's going to be very, very difficult for the Chirico to survive that early storm. Buckley's an absolute nightmare in round one. But what I would say is, if the Chirico can make it out of round one, this fight becomes extremely interesting. And when you look at how tough the Chirico's been in the past, the fact that he's only been finished one time in his eight UFC fights, there's a pretty good chance that this, the Chirico can make it out of round one. And if he can, I think this fight could go either way. It's completely up for grabs. So, it's a tricky one, man. I can definitely see why Buckley's the favourite. But just like with Ramazan Emeev, the odds are way too steep for me to bet him as a big favourite here, just because, there are things that Chirico can do to make life difficult for him. So it's an interesting one, this. Like I say, I was all over Buckley. If you would have asked me a week ago before I started fight research, Chris, I want to bet some money on this Holloway Kattar card. Who's the safest bet? I would have told you Jacqueline Buckley. Go for it. But if you're thinking of betting Buckley, I would definitely do a little bit of research on this one and just watch their past fights and just see for yourself if you're happy with him. I definitely wouldn't be betting Buckley based on hazy memories, because I don't think he's as good as many people think he is. I could be wrong. Let me know in the comments section below, boys, what you think. But anyway, we will move on to the next fight. Needless to say, it's another boring pass for me. But we do have a bet in this video, so keep watching, boys. Don't go anywhere. We now go on to the next fight. We're going to be talking about Jingliang Li against Santiago Ponzinibbio. And it's brilliant to see Ponzinibbio back. He's obviously been out of the octagon for a very long time with some health issues. And right off the bat, I suppose we should get into them, because they are probably the most significant aspect of this fight that we need to discuss. So, earlier on in the video, I said there's some recurring themes, throughout the video, where we've been saying, there's not really enough footage on Soriano, Zawada, and Todorovic to know what version of each guy we're getting, this weekend. There's tons of footage on Santiago Ponzinibbio, but because he's been out for so long, he's been out for 2 years. We haven't seen him since November 2018. Because he's been out for so long, we don't know what version of Ponzinibbio we're going to get this weekend. Because not only is ring rust a real issue, but Santiago Ponzinibbio has been battling some pretty significant health issues. It says here, we can see this headline from Bloody Elbow. Santiago Ponzinibbio discusses overcoming career-threatening blood and bone infections. So whenever you see the word career-threatening, my first instinct is to think that might have lasting, long-term damage forever. You know what it's like. I always compare fighters to batteries, Not rechargeable batteries, straight-up standard Duracell batteries. When the straight up standard Duracell batteries go flat, you have to throw them away. They don't work as effectively as they used to, right? You know what it's like if the batteries start to go dead in a torch, the torch doesn't stay on for as long. The torch doesn't work as well. The light gets a little bit dimmer. You should look at fighters in the same way. When they're brand new, 21 years old, just starting their career, they've got a full battery. They could take tons of damage, fight through it, train hard, they don't get injured as much. But every single fight they have, every punch they take, every hard sparring session, every injury they go through takes a little bit out of their charge, and they can never get it back. So when you see a guy like Santiago Ponzinibbio, 34 years old, he's had 30 pro fights, he's been in tons of wars, he relies on his chin a lot. When you then see a guy with all these miles on the clock come out and suffer a career-threatening, blood and bone infection, it just makes me question how much is that taken out of his battery, and how is he going to come back from that? And the true answer is we don't know. But as a professional gambler, it's my job to try and make the best decision possible with incomplete sets of information. And so whenever I see something like this, I always expect the worst, and then anything else is a bonus. So if I see a fighter's suffered from a career-threatening injury, I'm going to automatically assume that there's long-term damage that's going to have a severe negative impact on future performances. And I will hold that opinion until a fighter shows up, puts in 3 hard rounds, and proves otherwise. That's the main issue with this fight, because when we look at it, we can see that, again, Ponzinibbio, one of the biggest favourites on this card. I'm sure everyone is thinking about throwing Ponzinibbio into their parlays this weekend, and I get it, man. Ponzinibbio is an unbelievable fighter. I'm a huge fan of him. But you have to look at the odds you're getting. 1.34 minus 294 for an implied probability of 75%. That's a very, very big price to pay, considering he's going up against someone like Jingliang Li, big underdog. But we know Jingliang Li has got big power in his hands, decent boxing, he's very aggressive, he's game as hell, and he's consistent. We know that Jingliang is always going to show up and bring it. Even when he gets his ass handed to him, like he did in the Neil Magny fight, he still was game, he was still trying to win, he was still dangerous in there. And, this fight is really no picnic for Ponzinibbio. He's going to have to be at his best. So when you look at, the factors surrounding this injury, he's saying he had a lot of medical problems. It started with a blood infection that spread to his bone. I think it was like staph infection, some other bacterial infections. But the more concerning thing for me was, we've seen fighters get over blood infections, staph infections plenty of times. Damian Maia's been through it recently. Jeff Neal went through it. And, even though he lost against Stephen Thompson, he still fought at a decent pace for 25 minutes. We know the staph infections, blood infections, bone infections, they're devastating. They can be life-threatening. But fighters can usually make a full recovery. The most concerning thing about this particular issue with Ponzinibbio for me was that he had an MRI scan and it revealed that he has arthritis. Now, it doesn't say which kind of arthritis he has, right? There are 2 kinds of arthritis. There's rheumatoid arthritis, which is an autoimmune type of arthritis, which can be controlled by, exercise and good diet and lifestyle changes. And then there's osteoarthritis, which is caused by permanent damage to bones, ligaments, and joints. Now, out of the 2, neither is good, because they're lifelong conditions that you have to live with. And as a fighter, it's very, very bad for you to have one of these 2 things, because if you have rheumatoid arthritis, my wife's got rheumatoid arthritis, I know a lot about it. Rheumatoid arthritis can be controlled very, very well with diet and exercise, and I'm sure Ponzinibbio is in amazing shape. I'm sure that he is eating very clean, and so on a day-to-day basis, the rheumatoid arthritis, if that's what Ponzinibbio does have, probably doesn't bother him that much at all. Might be a bit sore in the morning, but I'm sure Ponzinibbio is just fine. The problem with rheumatoid arthritis is you go through cycles where symptoms flare up, and they can be debilitating to the point where you can struggle to close your fist, you can struggle to walk. It gets real bad, and one of the triggers that leads to flares in rheumatoid arthritis is chronic stress and anxiety. So you think about what it's like to be a fighter. You think about what Ponzinibbio feels like this week, every night going to bed. Hasn't earned any money for the past 2 years. He's seen the welterweight division pass him by. He's been, trying to get back into the octagon for the last 2 years and had fights cancelled. He's going up a tough opponent in Jingliang. He's got bills to pay, all this pressure on him to perform. He knows that, he's already lost so much momentum being out for 2 years. If he loses to Jingliang, that's going to basically, put him back to square one and wipe out all the hard work that he's done, picking up big wins over guys like Neil Magny, Mike Perry. Imagine the stress and anxiety this guy is going to be facing going into his fight this weekend. And that could quite easily trigger a nasty rheumatoid arthritis flare. I don't know if that's the version of arthritis he's got. That would probably be the better out of the 2, to be honest with you, because if he's got osteoarthritis, that's even worse. That's permanent, long-term damage that can't be healed. It's like breaking a vase, breaking a fucking glass. You can glue it back together, it'll never be the same again. And if you want to know the extent of how bad osteoarthritis can be in terms of a fighter's ability to perform, we have seen, one of the fighters that has gone through the biggest decline. One of the fighters that's gone through the biggest decline over the last few years is Tyron Woodley, right? He went from being one of the best pound-for-pound fighters in the world, the welterweight champion, to really seeing his career fall off a cliff to the point where, even Dana White has said Tyron Woodley looks like a complete shadow of himself and he should probably think about retiring. And that, I think a big part of that is the fact that Woodley is developed chronic arthritis in his hands. So when you see headlines like this and you see, a fighter having issues with arthritis, it is not to be taken lightly. So I'm sorry to spend so long going over that. But again, when I say things on these video, boys, this is not a joke to me. I hate betting sites. And, the vast majority of you guys that watch these videos, you subscribe to me. You hit the like button, you leave positive comments, you send me nice DMs. Many of you watching this pay me money every month. You sign up to my website. Believe it or not, I actually care a lot about you and how you perform as a bettor. And I know that many of you will be scanning through the fights this weekend and you'll be like, yeah, Ponzinibbio's a beast. That's a tough fight for Jingliang. I'm going to check him in my DraftKings team. I'm going to throw him in my parlays. Same with Buckley. Yeah, he can go in. He's going to be a really good bet. He's going to be a safe bet. And I promise you guys, there's risk here. There's a lot of risk that I personally feel makes Ponzinibbio unbettable at these odds. Now, we've spoken a lot about those X factors, the layoff, the injury, all this kind of stuff. Let's take a little look at, let's just take a little look at how these guys match up from a technical point of view. But I will, like I say, I will put an asterisk next to how I'm going to summarize this matchup, just like I did with Zawada, by saying that, I can talk about, how Zawada's looked in the past. But because of that layoff, we might get a completely different version of him this weekend. And the same goes for Ponzinibbio. Everything I'm about to say, is based on past performances. But because of the health issues, the arthritis issues, the ring rest, the version of Pons we get this weekend might not be anything else. Might not be like anything we've seen before. On the flip side, because we've got to be radically open-minded, Ponzinibbio might come back and look better than ever. I mean, in interviews, he said that he's fully recovered. He said that he's better than he's ever been before and he can't wait to show off his improvements. But what I would always say when you hear fighters talk like that is take it with a pinch of salt. Take it with a grain of salt. Because I'm not calling Ponzinibbio a liar. Ponzinibbio is one of my favourite fighters. He's a fucking animal. I love to watch this guy fight. But one of the reasons why fighters are fighters at the highest level of the sport is because they have a tunnel vision, a pig-headed stubbornness, a brutal one-track mind where they have got crazy drive, crazy determination, and in their mind, they still believe that they're the best fighter in the world. And no amount of setbacks, no amount of injuries, no amount of adversity is going to make them believe differently. That's why you see guys like, Michael Bisping, go many years past when he probably should have retired. Guys like, Matt Wyman, we've seen plenty of guys in Bellator, Vanderlei Silva, Anderson Silva in the UFC. Guys that should have retired still believe they're the baddest man on the planet because they can't accept the reality of the situation. In their heart, they believe that they are still the best fighter in the world. And so I would expect Ponzinibbio to say he's made a full recovery. But just for me, I need to see it. I need to see it before I can believe it. All right? And that just is what it is. But from a technical point of view, both these guys primarily strikers. I very much doubt that this fight's going to go to the ground. They both do shoot the odd takedown here and there. But this fight's predominantly going to be standing, I would imagine. The real difference between these two fighters for me is that Ponzinibbio is way better defensively. What I really like about Ponzinibbio is that he's got a great chin. He's very tough. great gas tank, can fight at a high pace, big power in his hands, but he's also sensible. And when he's facing someone with power and they come forward and attack him, he's smart enough to know, I'm much better just slipping this shot and chipping away at them from a safe range and kickboxing range than trying to fight him in a phone booth, risking a big shot and getting hurt. And that's really the difference between these two fighters. Jingliang's always coming forward, looking to bet on his chin against yours, exchange big shots and fight you in a phone booth, whereas Ponzinibbio is just looking to chip away at you from a safe distance, and when he senses you're going to come forward and look to land something big on him, he just circles away and gets out of there. He's got brilliant striking defense, and I think that's the main difference between these two fighters. Both are very good boxers. Ponzinibbio's much better defensively. They've both got big power in their hands, but there's a much higher probability that Ponzinibbio is going to land bigger and bigger power shots, more frequent power shots on Jingliang, just because Jingliang is very, very reckless and Ponzinibbio fights a lot safer. I just think this is a great stylistic matchup for Ponzinibbio. You know, if the fight stays standing, which I expect it to, Pon should just pick Jingliang apart. I just hope that he turns up and looks just as good as he ever did. Because genuinely now, I'm not exaggerating, I think Ponzinibbio is absolutely brilliant. And I think he beats most of the guys in the top 10 rankings at welterweight. And I genuinely believe he is even championship material. That's how good this guy is. I'm just praying for him and his family that he can bounce back from all these really nasty health issues that he's gone through. But wishing Ponzinibbio big luck for this weekend, because it's clear he's been through a real tough time. And I love a good comeback story, man. Nothing against Jingliang. He's a great guy too, but I think Pons really needs a win this weekend. Just to remind everyone, one of those you all must have forgot performances would be great. So we just spoke about, a fighter, or we just spoke about how fighters sometimes struggle to accept the reality of their situation and how they go on and perform for a lot longer than they should do. And that brings us on to the next fight, the co-main event between Matt Brown and Carlos Condit. I'm just going to have a quick drink, boys, as I have been talking quite a lot. Just a quick one. Okay, that is better. So we've just spoken about fighters that maybe overstay their welcome a little bit. And that brings us nicely on to Matt Brown against Carlos Condit. Conduit? No, he's not a conduit. His name's Carlos Condit. Two guys that have had a very long career. Two guys that have both openly spoken about retirement. I actually think both have retired in the past. I know for sure Matt Brown retired and came back. I'm pretty sure Carlos Condit retired and came back as well. But whenever you've got, fighters like this in the tail end of their career, flirting with retirement, tons of miles on the clock, I would just say avoid. This is not the kind of fight that you want to bet on. You don't know what the motivation of guys like Condit and Brown are at this stage in their career. You don't know, any lingering chronic long-term injuries that are going to have a massive detrimental effect on their performance on Saturday night. You have no idea. When you're betting on MMA, you want to keep the unknowns to a minimum. You want to have as much information as possible to suggest you're putting your money in a strong position. When you've got guys this old, this beaten up, with motivation issues, it's just a minefield, and it's very, very hard to make money betting on these kind of fights. But it is very important that we take a look at the odds. So Carlos Condit currently around about an average of 1.60, which is minus 167 for an implied probability of 63%. If we take a look at the odds on Mr. Brown, he is currently around 2.40, which is plus 140 for an implied probability of 42%. Implied probability of 42%. And so, when you look at this matchup, the fight is roughly... the bookies have roughly got a 60-40 in Condit's favour. And having researched this matchup, I can definitely see why. There's a lot to get through in this one, though. So where do we begin? Okay, first of all, let's start with miles on the clock and X factors. In terms of size and age, Condit is a little bit younger. He's only 36 years old compared to Brown, who's 40 years old. Both guys are roughly around about the same size, though. Condit 6'2" with a 76-inch reach. I need to stop saying Mike Brown. Matt Brown's 6 foot tall with a 76-inch reach. Both guys have got an enormous amount of miles on the clock, though. Matt Brown's had almost 40 pro fights, and Carlos Condit has had over 40 pro fights. And the most concerning thing about that for me is they're not, 40 pro fights where they've been nice, clean, quick wins. When you go back and you look over the careers of both Condit and Brown, they've been in tons of wars, and they've had tons of injuries. There is a serious amount of miles on the clock with these guys. Look at this. There's a 25-minute title fight there, 25-minute title fight there. 25 minutes, not 25 minutes, but 15 minutes. What I'm trying to say is earlier on in the video, we said that, Todorovic and Soriano had a good number of fights, but they hadn't had a lot of, in-cage experience. Condit and Matt Brown, the complete opposite. Look at how many minutes these guys have spent in the octagon. And every single minute you're spending in the octagon, remember the battery analogy, every single minute, every punch you take, that's taking your charge down to the point where, every future fight we see you in, you're going to be capable of a little less. And so, especially for Matt Brown being 40 years old, every time we see this guy, you would expect him to be a much worse version of the previous time we saw him, because Father Time catches up with you very, very quick at this stage in your career. When you reach the age of 33, the body, or the male body, starts to produce significantly lower levels of testosterone every year, and so it becomes harder to recover from injuries. It becomes harder to get the motivation to train. It becomes, harder to kind of psych yourself up and get yourself in the state of mind that, you're confident and you feel aggressive and you want to go in there and tear your opponent's face off. There are a lot of reasons why lower testosterone levels are bad, which is why, in the pre-USADA days, many fighters were on testosterone replacement therapy to try and boost their testosterone levels, to try and give them that fire again. Without that fire, it is very, very difficult for guys like Condit and Brown to stay motivated and keep bringing it, this deep into their career. One of my big issues with Matt Brown in this fight is that he is kind of fragile because of all the damage he's taken, but he hasn't really adjusted his fighting style to account for that. So a good example I can give you is Glover Teixeira, right? So Glover built a career off walking guys down, putting tons of pressure on him, forcing him to fight in an uncomfortable range, betting on his chin against theirs, and just dragging him into a war, and relying on his toughness, determination and his grittiness to get the win. Matt Brown has built a career off the exact same style. Obviously, there are a lot of differences in the actual, technical aspects of what Glover and Matt Brown do. Main strategy is the same. Brown would come forward, put tons of pressure on his opponent, and just look to break them with sheer violence. It's why we all love Matt Brown. It's why he's such an entertaining guy, because of all the wars that he's put on for us over the years. The problem is, it gets to a point in a fighter's career where they can't take a shot like they used to. They can't take damage like they used to. And that's when they need to adjust. And they go one of two ways. They either go the Glover Teixeira route, where, Glover suffered a couple bad knockouts, or, got wobbled a couple times pretty bad, and realized, shit, I can't fight like I used to because I can't take a shot like I used to. So I'm going to need to start to fight safer. And that's why we see now Glover use a hell of a lot more grappling in his fights. Glover's still aggressive, don't get me wrong, but he doesn't come into his fights with the same strategy where he would just come forward, relentless pressure, and basically looking to fight you in a phone booth. Glover uses way more grappling now. If anything, he uses that pressure in his boxing to set up his takedowns. Based on Matt Brown's last fight against Miguel Beza, I don't feel that he's adjusted his fighting style. It's very difficult to form a strong opinion on that because he did retire back in 2017 and we've only seen him in 2 fights since then. There was a lot of grappling in his fight against Ben Saunders, but that was largely because Saunders kept pulling guard. And so all we can really do is base our decision on Brown's last fight against Beza. And against Beza, Brown came out, took control of the centre of the octagon, and looked to just get in Beza's face and overwhelm him with aggression. Unfortunately, he didn't have the chin to back that up, and Beza dropped him twice quite easily. They didn't look like particularly hard shots to drop Brown, and Beza was able to put him away. That's a big issue for me, because there's no doubt that Condit and Brown have got a lot of miles on the clock, but Condit at this point in his career seems way more durable and way sharper than Brown. Condit is definitely a guy on a steep decline as well, but at this stage in their careers, I do think that Condit's a lot more capable. 4 years isn't usually a massive difference in MMA, but the difference between a 36-year-old and a 40-year-old is a lot. We were saying that past the age of 33, the male body starts to produce significantly lower levels of testosterone. So that additional 4 years of major decline for Brown is a pretty big deal. And that's just one of the reasons why I think it's fair that Condit is the favourite in this fight. Now, there are certain things that Condit does well that I think can cause Matt Brown big trouble, which is again the reason why I completely agree Condit's the favourite here. The first thing Condit does very well is hammer the body with body kicks. Condit does switch stances from orthodox to southpaw, but he likes to fight orthodox stance fighters from the southpaw stance, which means he's always in that open striking stance, right? Matt Brown is an orthodox stance fighter, which means his entire body is exposed to the power left kick from Condit from the southpaw stance. We know that Matt Brown is very, 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 very susceptible to body kicks. We've seen multiple guys drop him with body shots throughout his career. And so Condit's body kicks are a huge weapon that he can use against Brown. Condit has a predominantly kicks-based style of striking. He's very fluid with his body kicks. He disguises them very well. It's very hard to see them coming. So that's a huge feather in the cap for Condit. On top of that, we're saying Brown is quite reckless when he comes forward and he can't take a shot like he used to. Condit is very good at slipping back when his opponent's coming forward and firing off the right hand to counter him. We saw him, completely crush Court McGee's nose with a right hand counter in his last fight. And, from what I've seen, there's no way that Matt Brown would be able to take a shot like that. So those are two reasons why I think Condit can cause Brown big problems. Now, definitely see why Condit's the favourite. He is a tempting bet for all the reasons I've just mentioned. But there are two issues here which make me pump the brakes on him a little bit and make me not love betting on him as a favourite, basically. Quite a big favourite at 1.60. So the first being his motivation issues. He has retired in the past. He's spoken quite openly about retiring, and he's kind of is only fighting for money at the moment. It's quite clear that his motivation is not what it used to be, and so that's a huge issue for me, because on any given day Condit can just turn up for one of his fights now and just think, you know what, I don't want to do this anymore. I'm going to go in there, get the paycheck, and then I'm going to retire. At this stage in Condit's career, that's always a concern. And out of these two guys, if you're asking me who's got more fire left in them, ironically, I would say Matt Brown. Because in Matt Brown's mind, he still believes like he can go out there like the warrior that he used to be and run right through his opponent. I'm not sure I see the same self-belief from Condit because of the body language he's shown and some of the decisions he's made in some of his recent fights against Chiesa and Oliveira. I won't get into that. If you want a more detailed breakdown, go check out the live stream research session for this fight on my website. But with this guy, I would say, it's one of those situations where I don't fully trust Condit to show up on Saturday night, because whenever a fight is retired, they've already got one foot out the door. The second risk factor to Condit here is the fact that his takedown defense and ground game is very, very bad. Now, I know all you OGs out there are probably like, Allsop, why the fuck are you talking about Condit's takedown defense and ground game? We know his takedown defense and ground game is bad, but it's not going to matter against Matt Brown, because Matt Brown's takedown defense and ground game is bad as well. Remember what I said earlier on in the video about having to read between the lines. Remember that it's been a long time since we had a good look at Matt Brown. His last two fights have ended in round 2, quite early on in round 2, and we haven't really had a good look at him since back in 2017. A lot can change in 3 years. And even though Matt Brown built a career off being like this fearless, warrior, reckless striker, it is worth noting that when he went on the Joe Rogan podcast a few years ago, he did say that he'd fallen in love with grappling and fallen in love with BJJ, and how he couldn't stop training grappling and BJJ and absolutely loved it. He looked very, very strong from top position, in 2019 in his fight against Ben Saunders. And so, with Matt Brown still looking like he's got the fire, even if his body is perhaps letting him down, I wouldn't rule out the possibility of Brown realising his back's against the wall here, realising he needs a win, coming in with a grappling heavy game plan, taking Condit down and causing him big problems on the ground. Condit's takedown offense is very, very bad, and so that's the other risk factor for me. So those two risk factors are too big for me to take a shot on Condit at favourite odds, but I could definitely see why he's the favourite. I wouldn't be betting Matt Brown here. So now that brings us on to the main event. Calvin Kattar against Max Blessed Holloway. Throughout this video, I've been saying that we're going to have a bet on this fight. So straight up, I'm going to be betting Calvin Kattar this weekend. I think he is a great bet at underdog odds. Now, please don't confuse the word great bet with safe bet. They're very different things. When I say great bet, I mean I think that the odds are very generous on Kattar. I think you're getting a great risk to reward ratio on Kattar. If we take a look at the odds at the moment, we've currently got Kattar at odds are around 2.30, which is plus 130 for an implied probability of 43%. And if we take a look at the odds on Max Holloway, we've currently got him at average odds of around 1.65, which is minus 154 for an implied probability of 61%. This is one of those fights where I strongly believe the odds are heavily influenced by the fighters' accolades and their win-loss records, as opposed to the skills that they've demonstrated in the octagon. I personally believe that if you just take all of Holloway's championships out of the equation, all the guys that these two fighters have fought, and solely evaluate them on their skills, I believe the odds are the wrong way round. I really do believe that Calvin Kattar should be the favourite in this fight. I know that many of you will disagree. I know many of you are on Holloway this weekend. Please leave a comment in the comment section below and let me know why you're on Holloway this weekend. I think a big trap, I'm not saying Kattar's going to win, but I think a big trap people might fall into this weekend is the age-old, wiki-capping approach to betting fights, where people will go, Kattar hasn't really beaten anyone, in the top 5. He lost to Zabit, he lost to Moicano. When you look at Holloway, he just lost a split decision to Volkanovski, who's the champ. Many people thought that the Holloway won that fight. He's beaten Frankie Edgar, he's beaten Brian Ortega, he's beaten Jose Aldo. Kattar hasn't beaten anyone anywhere near the level of these guys like Aldo. Why is Kattar? It doesn't make any sense why you give Kattar a chance here. He hasn't fought anyone. He's kind of like the wiki cappers' go-to reason for betting against someone. But I prefer to take a different approach. I prefer to, study an athlete's past fights, look at their skills, and just look at how they match up with their opponent from a skill-for-skill perspective. How do Kattar's skills match up against Holloway's skills? And when I look at the fight through that lens, I believe Kattar is just a better striker than Max Holloway. And that's the main reason for it. When you look at both Kattar and Holloway, they've both got a predominantly boxing style of fighting, but Kattar has way more intent, way more danger to his style of fighting. When Kattar lands, he is devastating. I watched an interview with Rob Font, Kattar's teammate, from just this past week, where he was saying, when Max Holloway fought Ricardo Lamas, there was that sequence where both guys stood in the middle of the octagon and they did the thing where, Holloway pointed, let's go. And they literally stood in front of each other for 20, 30 seconds, exchanging bombs. And Lamas walked away. He was hurt in that fight. He lost that fight. But Lamas walked away from that exchange absolutely fine. When Calvin Kattar came forward and got into an exchange with Ricardo Lamas. He absolutely bodied him. It was a devastating knockout, and Kattar booked Lamas a one-way ticket to the Shadow Realm, and I'm not sure if Lamas has been the same since. And that kind of comment from Font does a much better job of explaining what I'm trying to say than I can. But basically, Holloway is a volume striker. He likes to break people down with volume, whereas when Kattar throws shots, he really hurts you very bad. He inflicts tons of damage. You know, to put away tough guys like Jeremy Stephens, Ricardo Lamas is not easy. And that's kind of huge, because Max Holloway, I'm going to say something that many of you will disagree with, but Max Holloway has pretty bad striking defense. If you go back and watch his last fight against Alexander Volkanovski, Volkanovski landed the left hand on Holloway any time he threw it. Holloway was very, very susceptible to the jab and ended up taking tons of damage in that fight just because he didn't address the right hand from Volkanovski. Throughout Holloway's career, we've seen him in a situation where he relies on his chin and his toughness to roll with the punches and get the better of striking exchanges. That could get him into a lot of trouble here, because if Holloway and Kattar get into, a boxing exchange, even if you think Holloway is the better striker, if both guys are landing, Kattar is the guy that's going to be landing with way more damage and way more intent. Holloway is there to be hit. His defense isn't good. Getting into exchanges with Kattar is going to be a very, very, very bad idea. And another thing we've got to think about Holloway is, he has tons of miles on the clock. We were just talking, throughout this video about the analogy I use of batteries. Holloway has taken so much damage, over the last few years. He was involved in an absolute war against Dustin Poirier. I mean, let's bring up that fight right now so you can take a look at Holloway's face at the end of that fight. Look at the damage that he took. We don't even know if this was the end of the fight, but Holloway took, a life-changing amount of damage in that fight against Dustin Poirier. He also took a lot of damage in the two Volkanovski fights. Like I said, you go back and watch his last fight against Volkanovski. Volkanovski landed the left hand at an insane percentage. Holloway just didn't deal with it. He just didn't see it coming. And so, for me, we've got two fighters on opposite career trajectories right now. We've had Holloway been on this huge upward trajectory, a great champion. He's beaten some of the greatest featherweights of all time. But his performances appear to be flatlining a little bit, where, even though Holloway is this very, very high-level striker, should he really be getting outstruck by, guys like Volkanovski, who are 5'6" and have a base in grappling? I don't want to take anything away from Volkanovski, but if you just go back 2 or 3 years, Volkanovski's striking was at a very low level. And I know that he has improved, but, has he improved to the point where he should be causing Max Holloway as many problems as he has standing? That is the real question. I'm not taking anything away from Volkanovski. He is a champion. He is a phenomenal fighter. But if you are asking me who is the better striker, Calvin Kattar or Volkanovski, not who is the better fighter, who is the better striker, Kattar's striking is light years ahead of Volkanovski. So if I see Volkanovski giving Holloway a problem, I think there's a very, very good chance Kattar could cause him a problem as well. Especially because Volkanovski is 5'6" with a 71-inch reach. Kattar is 5'11" with a 72-inch reach. So I know that the reach is about the same, but because Kattar is so much taller, it's going to make it way easier for him to slip the power shots of Holloway and use his length to basically cause Holloway a problem. It's going to be a lot easier for someone like Kattar to land a jab than Volkanovski, because of the size difference with Kattar and Holloway being about the same height. Kattar has to cover much less distance than someone like Volk to land the jab. So when you look at Max Holloway and we talk about these fighters on opposite career trajectories, there is also a little bit of evidence of this, right? We know that iron sharpens iron. People say however you feel about sparring, I do agree with the narrative that in order to stay sharp, you have to spar, right? You can't you can't learn, you can't be a race car driver, show up to a Grand Prix race once every 3 months, just, driving on, Forza Motorsport simulation games. It doesn't work like that. You've got to be out there on the track. You've got to, feel the wetness on the tires. You've got to feel the wind resistance in the air. You got to feel the nerves, and the anxiety of heading into a bend at 100 mile an hour. The simulations can't give you. And we know that Max Holloway doesn't spar anymore, which is a real big concern for me. So before I go into just going into this point in a little bit more detail, just hear it straight from the horse's mouth. Just listen to Max talking about it himself.
For stuff going on, so it's kind of crazy, We're going into this fight camp too without I think I really loved how the last camp I didn't spar. Like it real opened my eyes to like I get injured sparring a lot before fights, and I felt great going inside that fight without sparring. And I'm a true believer in I sparred so much when I remember sparring every day when I first started. When I was 16 and I first started out, we'd spar every day, and it kind of got less and less over the years. And I mean, like, sparring is like an ego trip or whatever. I understand you got to do something, but you can figure out different ways to move and get it done. And I believe you do need hard days, but the sparring and stuff, it didn't hurt me. Even doing the whole training camp, it helped a lot. That last camp to actually put our priorities straight and look like I got to took out some things. I got to add a little bit more stuff. So it was just changing up the recipe. And the last one, I thought went pretty well, so we kind of sticking to it, and we see how this one goes.
Yeah, I mean, it didn't seem like your performance suffered at all by not being able to spar. So just to be clear, you're not sparring at all again for this one? Zero rounds? Or?
No, saving the brain. I want to be a guy that third grade math for me is already hard. So I can only imagine if I was getting punched in the head and trying to help Mini Bless at the night, I'll be all off. So sparring is kind of out the door right now, and the thing that's really making me think hard is third grade math, third grade science, third grade on spelling. It's like it's just crazy.
Right.
So, when we talk about fighters who are on different career trajectories, right? When you look at interviews with Calvin Kattar, all he is talking about is how well prepared he is for this fight, how hard he's trained, how motivated he is, and how he understands this is the biggest opportunity of his life to go out there on ABC Saturday night, beat Holloway, one of the biggest names in the UFC, one of the best featherweights of all time, and take all that momentum, take that star power from Holloway and elevate himself to a title shot. Kattar is super hungry and super motivated. He's in the gym every day training with a long, tall, rangy, technical striker like Rob Font. Iron sharpens iron, and we all saw how good Rob Font looked recently against Marlon Moraes. Think Calvin Kattar is in there in the gym every single day with this guy. Compare that to Max Holloway, very, very different, how do I word this? Very, very different energy, very, very different body language, and sounds like he's in a much different state mentally. He's had that big run up. He started his career very young. You hear him talking about sparring when he was 16. He's got the belt. He's been under the bright lights. He may be suffering a little bit from post-title fight blues where, he lost 2 close fights to Volkanovski. And for me, his body language, his tone, it just doesn't sound like he's really as up for this fight as you'd like him to be. And I think it's a huge concern that he doesn't spar anymore, because even though he looked good against Volkanovski, he's going to be coming into the fight this Saturday against a young, hungry, aggressive, dangerous Calvin Kattar. There won't be any feeling out process. Kattar has the power in his hands and the technique to KO Holloway dead in the first round. We know Holloway starts slow, Kattar does as well. But there's no... This is not a 5'6" grappler like Volkanovski punching you in the face. This is not this is not a grappler like Brian Ortega, a much smaller guy in Frankie Edgar that's got a base in grappling. Calvin Kattar's striking is very, very, very nasty. And I think it's a big mistake that Holloway's coming into this fight not doing any sparring when he's fighting a guy as technical and as dangerous as Kattar. Now, I just want to play you this famous clip from a few years back where Bisping interviewed Max Holloway, and he basically called him out as not being in a particularly good place in terms of how he was sounding and stuff. It's basically the concussion clip. You guys have all seen it. Let's just take a look at this.
Well, Max, you say you feel great, and, don't be offended when I say this, but you look like you just got out of bed. Are you tired? What's going on? How's the weight cut? Are you drained? I mean, you look a little sleepy.
I'm good, man. I'm good. A little bit tired. They got me doing a bunch of media stuff, but I'll be fine, man. I can't wait. I can't wait to go out there and do the damn
Good
thing.
to know. As I say, no offense, but you just look like, you're ready to fall asleep on me there.
So the fallout from this interview was that it came to light that Max Holloway had suffered a concussion in training, and he ended up getting pulled from his scheduled fight. We hear Max Holloway talk about concussion and brain health a lot now in his interviews. We just heard him briefly touch on it against, in that interview with Brett Okamoto, where he's saying he's trying to preserve his long-term brain health. And again, that is a huge concern for me about where Holloway's motivation is at, where his mentality is at this stage in his career. Because Kattar has got just one goal in mind this weekend: beat Holloway, become the champion. Every single ounce of energy he has in his body and his mind is committed to achieving that goal. Whereas Holloway is thinking about, I can't spar because, I've had concussion symptoms in the past and it was horrible. I don't want to go through that again. It's just basically two fighters on different career trajectories. From a technical point of view, I think the thing that really sets these two fighters apart, well, in fact, there's two things that really sets these two fighters apart. The first thing we've mentioned is power. Holloway's more of a volume striker. Kattar can match the volume, but he hits way harder. The second thing is defense. Kattar's ability to read his opponent is amazing, to be quite honest with you. Kattar is very, very good at getting a read on his opponent and reacting to them, either by circling away from them, covering up and blocking a shot, or firing back with a counter. He's incredibly good at reading his opponent. I don't feel Holloway is anywhere near as good at reading his opponent. Holloway, quite often, if you go back and watch him in his past fights, he'll get caught with a clean, hard punch, and then that'll kind of psych him up. He doesn't see it coming, but he'll be like, okay, come on, you caught me, let's go. And then what'll happen is he'll come after his opponent and start throwing a lot of volume to kind of break him down with pressure and volume, but he doesn't really see the shots coming. He doesn't read his opponent in the same way. So if these guys are getting into exchanges, with both guys having a traditional boxing style, I just feel Kattar is a much better boxer. He's going to take much less damage, and he's capable of hurting Holloway way more than Holloway is capable of hurting Kattar. So I am going to be betting Kattar this weekend. Not a super confident bet. It's not a safe bet, but it's a good value underdog bet. A very good value underdog bet. I think the odds are the wrong way round. I think if you took their MMA records away, their titles away, their accolades, who they'd fought, and you just capped this fight purely based on skill, Kattar should definitely be the favourite. I think Holloway's legacy is having an impact on these odds, and I think the odds are way off. So, don't go too big on Kattar. It's definitely a risky bet, but I think it's a good risk to reward ratio. And fingers crossed he comes through for us. So hopefully you enjoyed that video, boys. That is going to be it for this video. Don't forget to subscribe if you haven't already. That would mean a lot to me. And please hit the like button below. If this video gets 300 likes, we get that live stream, the prop bet live stream, coming this week. So hit the like button, boys. Also, don't forget, there is still half a card that I have not talked about in this video. If you want to see breakdown videos for those fights, head on over to my website, MMABettingTips.com, and join our community. It would mean a lot to me. It would be great to see some new faces around there. I think you will like it quite a lot, so give it a try. Anyway, boys, take care. See you soon. I'll be back soon. Friday, we're going to get that live stream in. Hit the like button. Have a great week.